Hello and welcome back to Burn Pile. This episode is going to be slightly different. This episode is going to be focused on just one story, just one main thing. If you've been listening to earlier episodes of the podcast, this is one I've been talking about doing for a while, and I think I mentioned it in the chat over at burnpile.vip, which is our website, and we have some discussions going there. And this whole episode is going to be about Neil Gaiman. So, the reason I want to talk about Neil Gaiman is because I think it's important to have a strong aesthetic sense of what you like and what you don't like. I have a sense of things that I like, and sometimes I'll be drawn to something that actually sucks. But I'll rarely avoid something and then regret it later. And in fact, if something goes against what I like aesthetically, and I decide to try it anyway, I always regret it. And probably the biggest example, one of the biggest examples of just someone whose work I have a complete aversion to, dislike for, just a real uneasy feeling when I look at it, is Neil Gaiman. I went through a big comic book phase. I was a huge comic book fag. I went through different phases with it multiple times. And of course, if you are into reading DC comics and you get into like Vertigo, the Sandman is like one of the big things on the list that you're supposed to read. And I think I read maybe an issue, maybe two, and I just could not get into any of it. And on the other side of this, I love the art of Todd McFarlane, and I really like, well, what I'm about to say is the same as saying, like, you are a retarded person. So, how can I say this? I like Spawn. I like the comic book Spawn. Now, Spawn, aesthetically, it's amazing. The Spawn art by McFarlane and the character designs, not just Spawn, but the other characters, they are so cool. They look so, so, so good. Now, the story in Spawn is really, really, really retarded. It's really dumb. There's a lot of cool concepts, but there was no editing going on. If you look at McFarlane's career, he had huge problems with his editors at Marvel. And so when he went off and did his own thing, it seems like, I don't know if this is what actually happened, but it seems like he just decided editors were completely unnecessary. It's a shame because, of course, when he started his own thing, when he co-founded Image, an editor would be working for him. He would hire the editor. So the editor wouldn't tell him what to do. It would just tell him that his plots had good ideas but made no sense and needed to be tightened up. But that never happened. But regardless, in the first 10 issues or so of Spawn, he got involved with Neil Gaiman. And Neil Gaiman made a character for Spawn and then basically sued Todd for rights to the character. And I mean, I don't really know or care who was right or who was wrong because I don't really think of things that way. I just like Todd McFarlane, And I just have always, always, always had this irrational dislike for Neil Gaiman. And I think the things you have in your mind that are irrational are probably the most important and the most true, and you should just follow them. So Neil Gaiman, he did this really scumbag thing. He went over to Marvel, who he knew Todd McFarlane hated. He made some deal with them, and Marvel like bankrolled his lawsuits against Todd McFarlane. It's just so gross. And it's like, okay, well, Neil Gaiman, he's this genius writer. He's this brilliant guy. He's this sensitive Englishman, blah, 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 whatever. And Todd McFarlane is this retarded Canadian guy who pretends to be Italian, who made cool character designs and then got a bunch of money and acted like a retard. If you listen to Todd talk, he's kind of retarded. So, like, everybody in the world would be on Neil Gaiman's side, but I always, I didn't like him. I didn't like Sandman. I didn't like the covers of his books, or I used to be, in my late teens, I had a bit of an NPR phase. I went from Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck when I was a young teen and a kid to listening to NPR, and they would talk about Neil Gaiman like he was a saint or something, like what he was writing was important or something. It was so weird. And then that movie, I think Coraline he wrote, and it was just disgusting. I just fucking hated it. I just hate the way it looks. Just, I don't like urban fantasy in general. I mean, some urban fantasy could be good, but I don't like urban fantasy. I don't like, gothic fairy tale bullshit. I I can't articulate why I don't like it, even to myself. I just don't like it. And I trust that feeling. And seeing all this come out about Neil Gaiman has been it's been such a justification for my faith. It's like my faith that Neil Gaiman sucked ass has been just totally rewarded. And it makes me very, very happy. So if you haven't seen exactly what happened, New York Magazine has, I guess, a sub brand called Vulture. And they finally reported on this in January about Neil Gaiman's questionable relationships with his young fans. Now, before that, in the summer, I believe it was, there was a podcast from a small outlet in the UK called Tortoise Media. And they ran with all these first. I think there's more allegations now, but they were the first ones to do this with a multi-part podcast series. And that podcast series, as well as this article, they're all very gay and feminist. They're at it from this really ridiculous angle. But still, I was very happy to see it because they're taking down someone I don't like. Which, again, I think you should embrace that part of yourself. I don't like Neil Gaiman. I don't like the way his books look. I don't like his voice. I don't like the way he looks. And I don't like what he did to my boy Todd. So I was just happy to see him getting taken down. That said, are the accusations against him legitimate? Well, regardless of if there's anything criminal in here, in any of what's said, it is all gross. It's really, really disgusting. And it shows what a fucking hypocrite and huge faggot he is. And that makes me glad. I do like that. So the Tortoise Media podcast, the thing is, they were very much a associated with like TERFism, like trans exclusionary radical feminism, which is just like being a man-hating woman retard, but also having rational ideas about what a woman is and not getting your space taken over by men in dresses, which we did talk about on the last episode of the show, you might recall. There was a very cool thumbnail for the last YouTube video, the last YouTube version of the podcast, that I'm very proud of. I wonder if it got taken down or if it was allowed to stay up because it was pretty mean. But because of that, just naturally, well, the biggest Neil Gaiman fans on the world are the biggest Reddit users in the world. That's just who would like this crap. But the fact that the accusations came from like a quote unquote turf outlet made it all a lot more controversial. And I guess a lot of them sort of had hope that it wasn't real. It was like, I don't know, a turf conspiracy to take him down or something. I mean, who knows? But now it's in New York Magazine. Now it's prime time. So let's get into it a little bit. So it's mostly about these different women who came to know Neil, and then he starts a sexual relationship with them, blah, blah, blah. But some of them are a lot weirder than others, and some of them sound a lot grosser than others. So I'm just going to jump to one of the grossest parts here. Hi, it's Wizard Cat from the future here. So this video is a re-upload, as you can see from the title. This video got taken down originally by YouTube, and I'm trying to re-upload it right now. And it looks like the reason it got taken down was this part right here. This is the part where I read a really disgusting allegation from a woman against Neil Gaiman. You can just go to the Vulture article and read it for yourself. It's the part involving butter. Okay, back to it. Okay, so I mean that's kind of the worst of it. And I mean the problem with Neil. See, if Neil were like an athlete I liked, if Neil were some kind of some alpha male type guy, I would think, yeah, what he did is gross. He's not handling his fame or power well, but I wouldn't really care that much. Honestly, I think that probably a lot of famous people whose work I admire probably have done this and worse, and I don't care. I just don't care. But with Neil, he's tweeted all this feminist stuff. His whole identity is being like a feminist ally to women, and like he says all this grandstanding liberal horse shit on top of being an artist that I hate. So fuck him. I'm glad this is all coming out. But I want to look at some photos of this asshole. Okay, yeah. If you're just listening to the podcast and you don't know who Neil Gaiman is, good. But I'm looking at a photo now. He's got these kind of big eyes. He's got this kind of like, I don't know, blank expression. It's like, you know when they say like Trump is like a stupid person's idea of what a rich person would be like. When you look at Neil Gaiman, it's like a female, middle-aged, overweight community college English adjunct professor's idea of what an intelligent writer looks like. That's what his face looks like. It's just a very, very, very rat-like little face that you just absolutely hate. So there's a photo of him in a leather jacket. There's a photo of him at the premiere of Coraline. But the big photo, okay, this is the one. Here's a photo of him in 2010 with his wife, Amanda Palmer, who was complicit in arranging like group sex with him and other women, and in getting young women for him to fuck by himself. She was complicit in all of that, all while supposedly being like a feminist herself or whatever. Because, by the way, nothing is real. Everything sucks. There's nothing out there. You need something transcendent to believe in, or you're a nihilist. Those are your options in life. Anything else is fucking kidding yourself. All right, so there's this photo of her, and she has unshaved armpits, right? Because she's such a powerful feminist and ally to women, right? And she's deliberately raising up her arm and posing in a way so you can see her unshaved armpit. And Neil is by her side, smugly staring into the camera. And he's looking at you, and he's like, I bet you're challenged by my wife's lack of shaving her armpits. I bet this challenges you. Are you feeling challenged right now? You're not as smart as I am. That's what his look is saying. I just hate this faggot so much. You have no idea. I really, really, really hope that there are some trumped up charges and he goes to jail for this. I just hate him. I just hate his gay ass. I just hate this bitch. All right, and there's another reason to hate Neil. This one probably bothers me even more than the pseudo rape or the full on rape, whatever you want to call it. What bothers me is if you look up Neil's life, he was a big Scientology guy. And that just never, ever comes up. Like, he doesn't talk about it. So I wanted to get into that because what this article does have going for it is the description of his Scientology life. So I'm going to read a long section of this now because I think it's worth it. Let me bring it up here. Because he's not just like a low-ranking Scientology guy. He's a big Scientology guy. So this is being brought up in the context of a book he wrote in, I think, 2013. It's called The Ocean at the End of the Lane. And this book was like about a little boy who is, I don't know, he has a rough childhood, blah, blah, blah. It's supposed to be like kind of about Neil himself. So now it gets into his actual history. And it's unbelievable how deep into Scientology he and his family were. Okay, so listen to this. In 1965, when Neil was 5 years old, his parents, David and Sheila, left their jobs as a business executive and a pharmacist and bought a house in East Grinstead, a mile away from what was at that time the worldwide headquarters for the Church of Scientology. Its founder, the former science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard, lived down the road from them from 1965 until 1967, when he fled the country and began directing the church from international waters, pursued by the CIA, FBI, and a handful of foreign governments and maritime agencies. Okay, so these are his parents. They deliberately moved to be there, right? David and Sheila were among England's earliest adherents to Scientology. They began studying Dianetics in 1956 and eventually took positions in the Guardian's Office, a special department of the organization dedicated to handling the church's growing number of legal cases, public communications, and intelligence operations. The mission of this office, as Hubbard wrote, was its covert use in destroying the repute of individuals and groups. On the side, the Gaimans ran the church's canteen, lodged foreign Scientologists in their home, and opened a vitamin company in town where they supplied courses of supplements for Scientology's detoxification programs, a business that grew exponentially alongside the expansion of the church. By the late 60s, David was the church's public face and chief spokesperson in the UK. It was a challenging job to say the least. The UK, following the example of a handful of other governments, had issued a report declaring Scientology's methods a serious danger to the health of those who submit to them. Hubbard would routinely punish members of the organization who committed minor infractions by binding them, blindfolding them, and throwing them overboard into icy waters. Back in England, David gave interviews to the press to smooth over such troubling accounts. The church was under particular pressure to assure the public it was not harming children. In his bulletins to members, Hubbard had made it clear that children were not to be exempt from the punishments to which adults were subjected. If a child laughed inappropriately or failed to remember a Scientology term, they could be sent to the ship's hold and made to chip rust for days, or confined in a chain locker for weeks at a time without blankets or a bathroom. Okay, there's a little bit about Lawrence Wright's book, Going Clear, pretty good book that I read. I think they made a documentary about it, but I read the book, didn't see the documentary. All right, skipping along here. David used Neil as an exhibit in his case to the public. In 1968, he arranged for Neil to give an interview to the BBC. When the reporter asked the child if Scientology made him a better boy, Neil replied, "Not exactly. Not exactly that, but when you make a release, you feel absolutely great. A release, in Scientology lingo, is what happens when you complete one of the lower levels of coursework." What was happening away from the cameras is difficult to know, in part because Gaiman has avoided talking about it, changing the subject whenever an interviewer or a friend brings it up. But it seems unlikely that he would have been spared the disciplinary measures inflicted on adults and children as a standard practice at that time. According to someone who knew the Gaimans, David and Sheila did apply Scientology's methods at home. When Neil was around the age of the child in the ocean at the end of the lane, the person said David took him up to the bathtub, ran a cold bath, and drowned him to the point where Neil was screaming for air. This guy has weird issues with power and domination with women? You're kidding. When this guy got power over young women, he exploited them sexually? No way. I don't believe it. It can't be. So when he writes his books, why is he doing this dark fantasy, not dark fantasy, this gothic fairy tale bullshit? Why is he doing this horse shit? He grew up in a cult. He didn't just grow up in a cult. He was the son of an extremely high-ranking family that ran fucking intelligence operations for a famous, wealthy, powerful cult. Okay? And he obviously got out of that cult at some point. I don't think he's a Scientologist now. And when he has this power and he has this platform because of all he's done, he starts doing fake feminist bullshit, starts tweeting about women's rights or whatever. Hey, Neil, how about tweeting about the cult you were in? How about when you're getting famous in the 80s and early 90s, you start using that power to talk about Scientology? So no other children have to be abused like you. Why are you talking about women's rights or whatever? Something you clearly don't believe in. This is why you really need to trust your aesthetic sense. If you're a heterosexual male and you ever looked at a copy of The Sandman and you thought, God, this really sucks my ass, I don't even need to read it, you were right. If you ever heard some fag or some woman talking about Coraline like it was good, and your brain just started to get foggy and you didn't really follow what they were saying, that's good. That's like a natural self-defense mechanism. It makes perfect sense. All right, so Neil Gaiman sucks my ass. Dasha from Red Scare had a nice little tweet about this that I liked. She says, my Satanist boss at the occult bookstore I worked at out of college tried to coerce me into a, quote, BDSM relationship, end quote, and make me a domestic/book clerk sex slave so I couldn't get through the Neil Gaiman Me Too. Many such cases, I think. Lots and lots of losers who got a modicum of power related to books and used it to try to fuck women. But you say, Wizard Cat, aren't you reading The Pussy by Delicious Tacos right now? But let me tell you why that's very, very different, okay? That's different because he's engaged with reality. All right? And let me tell you what I mean by that. About being engaged with reality. All right, I'm going to bring up this Red Scare. Let me bring up this Red Scare right here, where they interviewed Delicious Tacos. I'm just going to play this little portion.
Like like I go to third world countries and fuck prostitutes, and like I get attached to like horrible BPD women, and like get put myself in terrible situations. I mean, Dasha, you and I have talked about this.
You're not thinking about pussy.
I mean,
well, he's an addict. Yeah. He's in recovery, Anna. For Christ's
Wait, but
sake.
that was my next question. Have you ever paid for sex?
Which
you
have.
Yeah,
a ton.
Yes,
what country, what nation has the best prosties?
The Philippines.
All right, so here's the thing. I guarantee you, the same people who love Neil Gaiman, before all this came out, before all this came out, the same women who loved Neil Gaiman would absolutely be disgusted with what you just heard from Delicious Tacos right there. They would think it was a really big deal. They would think it was super, super gross, and they would not like it. Now, why is that? Okay, and here's your answer. If you're confused about why that is, you need to go look at a piece of media that features gay male characters and where the writer is a woman. And watch the gay characters hold hands, look into each other's eyes, fall in love. And then go talk to actual gay men in real life, or look at some fiction or some nonfiction that's by gay men about a gay subject. And you'll see that, as you're reading about like public fisting in like a gay bar in San Francisco in the 80s, right before the AIDS crisis hit, as in like the band played on, or like, group sex on like Fire Island or whatever, like you'll realize women have no idea what male sexuality is. Women are naive about male sexuality. And that's why they can get tricked by guys like Neil Gaiman. See, the most out there sexually like diva or pop star, female celebrity who has ever lived, who's, been with 100 guys and lots of the hottest celebrity guys or whatever. This is something women don't understand. They see that and they're like, yeah, see, women can be just as bad as men. No, the fat dad in his 50s that you see walking around Walmart with his fat wife has a higher libido than the most sexually active female pop star who ever lived. He's keeping that in check. You know, whether it's because of his situation or if it's a religious thing or whatever, he's holding it in. We're all holding it in. That's what it is. That's why we have all these social mores that we have. It's because men have just got to hold it. So when an artist gets up like Delicious Tacos and talks about what he's doing, I mean, you're like, okay, well, he's not holding it in. He's going to the Philippines to fuck prostitutes. But what he's not saying is, I love my wife with her armpit hair, and when I have power over young women, I use it to lift them up. I use it to defend women's rights. Like, that's retarded. You see that? That can't possibly be real. That's not a real thing that any man with an ounce of power would ever do for real reasons. And when a man says, I'm going to fuck hookers in the Philippines, I take my money I make from my self-published Kindle Amazon books that are called The Pussy and called, you know, Finally Some Good News with a mushroom cloud that looks like a penis on the cover. I take whatever money I make from that and I go fly to the Philippines and I fuck the poor third world women there. When you hear that, you're like, oh, yes, I believe you. Okay, so The Pussy, I'm not finished it yet. I'm still reading it. But I have read another book, actually a couple books by the next author I want to talk about, who is Michel Houellebecq. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Don't ding me if I'm not. Don't ding me. So, Houellebecq he really is a genius. He's way above, no disrespect to Delicious Tacos. I actually have a lot of respect for him. He has great writing. He has a great Twitter account. He's obviously a very smart and talented guy, but he is someone who completely went his own way, self-published everything on Kindle. As far as I'm aware, I don't think he ever got a book publishing deal, certainly not a mainstream one. And Houellebecq is the exact opposite of that. Houellebecq could not be more different from that. He reached the pinnacle of the French literary world. He's he's controversial, but he's also very respected. The book that I read of his, one of them that I read that I really liked, it was called Platform. And Platform is also about a sex tourist. And I'm pretty sure that Houellebecq himself must have had experience as a sex tourist in Southeast Asia, because the book is all about a French sex tourist, basically, in Thailand. And it's a very, very entertaining book. There's a scene in there that I always think about that's really, really funny, where the character is in a tour group. I think they're all French, or at least they're all Westerners, maybe all Europeans. And it's a mixed group of men and women. And one of the women starts going off. They're in Thailand. And one of the women starts going off about how disgusting the sex work is and how disgusting it is to see the older men with the younger women, and how the women must be very desperate for money and how exploitative it is. And then the protagonist sort of, if I'm remembering right, everybody's really quiet. All the women are agreeing. Most of the men are agreeing. Some of the men are agreeing, but mostly staying silent. And the protagonist of the story kind of stands up and says, that's not true. They're the ones who are going out and doing that. They're getting like expensive handbags and they're getting expensive breast implants, and they're doing it because they don't want to work for low wages in the factory jobs, and this pays better. And then it's really, really funny. And then afterward, everyone is like kind of keeping their distance from him. He's sort of ostracized from the group. And it's a great scene. It's really funny. Do I want to spoil the ending? No, I guess not. But let's just say fundamentalist Islamism comes into the book, and it's a great read. I want to read more of his work. I read that, and I think the English title is The Elementary Particles. Also very, very good, a very moving book. You could call his books probably nihilistic, or I think this New York Times Magazine article that I'm putting up on the screen, I think it calls him misogynistic. Maybe it's more misanthropic than misogynistic. I don't know. But regardless, he's a real artist. He also was part of probably the greatest episode of any podcast there ever was, which was when he was interviewed through an interpreter on Red Scare, and they were talking about the morality of like assisted suicide and those kinds of things. That is an amazing podcast, probably the best one I've ever listened to. It's why Red Scare is one of the most influential podcasts in the world. Say what you want about it, but that was amazing. But anyway, I actually bring this article up because of one of the comments in it. So there was a comment in here that I really, really liked a lot. And by liked, I mean I want to laugh at the retardation. So Houellebecq, he's this brilliant man, great artist. He has, unlike someone like Delicious Tacos, who is maybe similar in his honesty, Houellebecq has actually conquered the literary world. Like, he really did reach the top of that world in France. And this article is all about him. So here's a comment about it. And the comment is from someone who only identifies herself as a PhD. So all she wants you to know about herself, and she has a picture, I don't know if it's of her, but it probably is. It's a picture of a woman there. All she wants you to know about her, she's not going to use a real name, not just use a first name or anything. It's a picture, and it's a PhD. That's her name. So all she wants you to know is that she's a woman, and she's a brilliant person. She's very highly educated. She has a PhD. Keep in mind that she wants you to know that as we listen to this comment from her. Okay. Brilliant and informative article. However, as a woman who has read several of Michel Houellebecq's books in French, each time with great displeasure, I find him horribly misogynistic, nihilistic, and dark. So much so that it often feels gross. Now, how much do you want to bet that this is not a PhD and this woman is a community college retard who loves Neil Gaiman? She's got American Gods on her bookshelf, and she thinks that's the kind of thing that I like. I'm going to leave a comment here, but I don't want anyone to make fun of me. I'm going to call myself a PhD. But all right, let's get to the good part. In fact, every time I read his work, I count my blessings for living in the United States and being shaped by American culture, where what he writes feels so offensive and, to me at least, dark and disgusting. What? What? This is your reaction when you read something challenging? this is your reaction when you read something that challenges your worldview. This is how you react. Look, I'm not an atheist. Houellebecq is an atheist. His books have an atheistic perspective in them. If my reaction were to be like, well, there's all this brilliant writing, all these insights and everything, but I'm glad I was raised in a Christian home where I can see that this is actually dark and disgusting. I'm grateful I was raised with that. So that, like, that's retarded. That's what you are. You might as well be a church censor. Like, if you wonder, sometimes people want you to look back at the past, like look back at medieval times or something and think about the oppression of that time. And they want you to think of the oppression, and they want you to think of like religious people now being the people who were religious oppressors back then. The religious oppressors back then were people like a PhD. Like, this is a missive from, A.E. Bishop or a cardinal. And they're writing about how evil this thing is. Like, there's just no willingness to engage with something outside of themselves. All right, and she wraps it up. One more paragraph here. I only hope this lengthy article is not part of a PR push for Houellebecq's Nobel Prize. Let's not elevate him to hero status. He represents masculinity at its worst. Okay, who's masculinity at its best then? Is it Neil Gaiman? Because he says favorable things about feminism, about women's rights? All right, so what pisses me off even worse than this, let's get into the replies to this comment, okay? So here's one from Jerry. Jerry says, honest question. Is he really advocating for, or in some way endorsing, abhorrent behavior, as your comment implies, or merely writing about it as fodder for descriptions of the human condition? Now, here's a reply to Jerry. Jerry, my first answer to your question jumps to the picture of his 34-year-old third wife. My second answer is the description of his, quote, uneducated grandmother who raised him. The term uneducated makes me flinch. I'm not sure it was chosen by him or the author, but it reduces her to a single dimension when she clearly raised a doctor and a famous author. Okay, so in the article, it talks about his uneducated grandmother. She thinks that's a big deal. But what really concerns me is the first part of her comment. She really thinks that he's a bad guy because he has a beautiful 34-year-old wife. So he's about 70. So let's go to the picture of his third wife. Okay, so she's like a very normal looking 5 or 6 out of 10 Asian woman in her 30s. So he took his power as a famous author who's very successful, and he's around 70 or so, and he took his power, and you know what he did with it? He married a much younger woman who's still quite attractive. And that, according to this comment, answers the question of whether or not he's a misogynist. In her opinion, him having a third wife who's very young, it does answer the question. He's a bad guy. Now, the same person making that comment probably loves Neil Gaiman, or did before all this came out. This is why women should have no opinions at all. I mean, really, if this is the way that they interpret the world, this is why, women read like 90% of all the books, but they're still retarded. You talk to any man, if you talk to a male person, any male, and he's read like more than 5 books in the last year, he'll be like one of the smartest people you've ever met. And every woman you talk to has read 100 books in the last 12 months, and they're all fucking retarded. They have no concept of the world or how to make sense of or interpret anything. It's like no matter what they do, they can't possibly have wisdom. They look at Houellebecq, they look at Delicious Tacos, and they look at Gaiman, and they say, yeah, the one who grew up in the evil cult being abused, but who always tweets about how much he's on the side of young women, that's the good guy. I want him to babysit my daughter. That's the good guy. I mean, it's just the stupidest thing you've ever seen. All right. Okay, one more thing. There's an author who has a sci-fi book who has a great tweet here that was in reaction to all this. This author is named Devon Erikson. Incidentally, his sci-fi book, which I believe is a self-published Amazon Kindle thing, one of the blurbs for it is by the creator of American Horror Story Carnival, who is the father of John Knopf, who is of the Hate Watch podcast, which a lot of people who listen to this podcast will know. But I thought that's very interesting. Going down the rabbit hole of this guy, I found that blurb, and that really stuck out to me. It's like, well, that's a weird synchronicity. But anyway, this author's name is Devon Erikson, and he has a great tweet here that sums up a lot of what I was just talking about. All right, I'm going to get into it. It's a bit of a long one. Chad isn't a rapist. That's the stereotype, but it was always a lie, an ill-fitting lie forced over reality. It's the story of the blonde, blue-eyed, buff captain of the high school football team who thinks the world revolves around him and won't take no for an answer. But Chad is not a rapist. He'll ask crudely, he'll ask boorishly, he'll ask women who aren't into it, but that's where it ends. Because if they aren't into it, the next one will be. Or the next. Because he's Chad. No, Chad is not a rapist. Because he doesn't need to be. The man you want to watch out for is the quiet one. The sensitive one. The one who says he's your friend. That he believes in you. That women are wonderful and the world discriminates against them. The one who always takes your side, even when you're wrong and selfish and an awful brat. The one who says he's different. Because he isn't. No man is different. We're all made of the same selfish goo as women are, and descended from a long line of men who couldn't say no to sex. On some level, unless you're ugly, you're always being offered a semen sample, in case you're interested. The difference is that Chad, and other men who are in touch with, at peace with, our own animal natures, will drop it if you're not interested. Because some other woman will be. Because you're cute, but you're not special or irreplaceable. Chad doesn't give a fuck. It's the man who sleazes his way up to you who has to try to turn no into yes. It's the man who pretends to have no sexuality, who condemns all male sexuality as predatory and threatening, who has demonized his own sexual nature and cut himself off from all legitimate, healthy, life-affirming outlets for it. Because of the man who calls himself your ally and demands nothing in return. Beware of the man who calls himself your ally and demands nothing in return. He's just hiding what he wants. Because everyone wants something. So that's a little crude, but it does summarize my thinking on all this. And in conclusion, just to wrap things up, I just want to restate a final time. I hate Neil Gaiman. He sucks my ass. I don't care if he actually raped those girls or not, or if he was just being an asshole. I hope he goes to jail for the crime of making books and comics that suck my ass.